You ever been a part of a team that seemed like everything it did, every turn that was made, it just created everything but success? Like it seemed like the team was constantly struggling. Everything they were doing just fell on deaf ears, and everything the team would do or what the leader would try to create ultimately just led to culture going down, goals not being hit, stress going up, and everything other than the desired result. Well, in this video, we're going to talk about how to turn around teams that are just tolerable and getting them to the top. And it's way simpler than you may think. And there's some steps along the way that I'm going to teach you some of the things that I've learned along my leadership journey in turning around teams in not one, not two, but in three different markets. And I'm going to teach you the lessons that I learned in each market so that you can apply them to any team that you're leading, whether current or future, on how to get them to go from tolerable to the top. So let's get started. So, hey, when I first started my leadership journey, I had my first leadership job in Miami when I was 27 years old. And I was moving from selling in Orlando, sold there for about 2.5 years for my organization, and moved down to Miami and was just completely unprepared for leadership, which I feel like most first time leaders are, and jumped into the deep end of the pool of leadership, not quite knowing what I was getting myself into, and combine that with the fact that I was moving to Miami, Florida, which even though I was in Orlando, I was told this early on and I didn't believe it, but everyone told me Miami was a different country. And I quickly found out that that was the case. Miami is an unbelievable city filled with culture and amazing food and amazing people. But the reality was, like, I moved down there at 27 years old with my then fiance and now wife, and we didn't even speak the native language, right? So we get there and we are 27 years old, and just getting there and figuring out how to get our footing in the city was one thing, but now I'm a leader leading a team of people that they speak the native language of Spanish and I don't. So I gotta figure this out. So a couple of the lessons that I learned in Miami from that job, that was really, really impactful. So number one is recognizing and acknowledging the gaps that you have first. So me recognizing that I was very young at 27, didn't speak the native language of Spanish, and had never really navigated in a major city. Orlando's big-ish, but Miami is a major metro. And never really navigated any of those things. And oh, by the way, as a first-time leader at 27 years old, I was leading people, a lot of which were older than I was. So I didn't know the market, didn't know the city, didn't know the language, didn't know the culture, and I had to acknowledge that. And I walked in and was very intentional with some of the things that I knew were shortcomings of mine. And what that does is it just brings their guard down a little bit. You know, whenever a new leader comes into a space, the first thing anybody initially goes to is like, what are they going to change? What are they going to fix? Are they going to look at me as the problem? What am I going to get fired? Am I going to get reprimanded? Am I going to have, is my job going to change? Like, is my day to day going to look different than what I've become accustomed to? So the first thing is like, you gotta de-threaten that a little bit and come down and just say, hey, look, I don't know the market, I don't know the city, I don't know the language, and I don't know the struggles you've been through. So I'm here to learn before anything else. And when you walk in with that mindset, it's super, super helpful for them to just let their guard down, take a deep breath, and know that you're there for them, as much as you're there for the job. So really, really important. So the next thing that I learned in that job kind of goes hand in hand with it, which is like, you gotta know your people. You gotta know them individually and collectively. And part of leadership is leading people, and leading people is messy. So personally and corporately, I had to know these people, and it takes more time than you think. It's going out to lunches, it's getting coffee in the morning, it's going to a happy hour every now and then, it's taking people out to dinner, it's getting to know their spouse. Like what I learned in Miami was family is really important to the Latin community. And I was always in the realm in Orlando selling for 2.5 years where it was like, when we're with business people, we're with business people, and the home people stay over here. And in Miami, we learned very quickly that when we were hanging out with work people equals significant other, spouses, children too. And so family is a really big culture component. And so knowing your people and getting to know them individually, culturally, collectively as a team is super important for them to be able to build trust with you. This will do two things. It'll begin to build a relationship, right? That builds that trust. And then the second thing it'll do is it'll show you if they're part of the problem or if they potentially could be part of the turnaround. So getting to know people instead of the natural inclination is coming in, seeing what the problems are, whether it's through data, whether it's through past performance, whether it's through any of the metrics that we could easily look at as leaders. Instead of doing that, getting to know people individually and collectively allows me to do both of those things. That relationship builds trust. And then, hey, maybe they're going through some stuff that I wouldn't have found out about if I didn't get to know them, that I could easily tweak in their day to day that helps them become more of a valued member of the team that rises their performance. So if I get to know them, I can figure out, are they part of the problem or can they be part of the turnaround? And you're going to find those things out through, how do they talk about the struggles that the team is going through? How do they talk about the leadership as the struggles have gone on? How do they talk about their teammates? Are they making excuses for a lot of things? Those are some of the signs that I look for as I'm starting to have individual and corporate conversations with the team and the individual contributors. Figure out, all right, are you somebody that's bringing this performance down, or are you somebody that's trying to raise it up, but you're just hitting a ceiling because of some of the struggles that the teams are having? That's something that you can do really, really quickly as you begin to know your people and take the time to do that. So the third thing I realized in Miami very quickly is a turnaround does not happen unless you get buy-in at some point. And buy-in means, hey, I think everyone wants to be a part of a winning team, but what we have to as leaders realize is being part of an average team often when we come in, especially if we're coming in from the outside, being part of an average team is comfortable for most people because that's what they've experienced for the last year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it's been. And so turnarounds don't happen unless you get buy-in at some point of the journey. And along with the buy-in, you're gonna need an advocate. So what is an advocate? Usually an advocate, the best advocates, I will tell you, and I'm gonna tell you a story behind this here in a second. The best advocates are people that it is the hardest person to get buy-in from. And the reason for that is because the best advocates are typically top performers. They're people that have respect in the office. But those people that are top performers and have respect in the office from their teammates, if you think about their previous leadership that has allowed this team to become less than excellent, the trust that that top performer, respected person has for the leader is very tainted, and they're going to assume that me coming in as the new leader, I'm just going to do the same thing and just try to throw my title around. And so your advocate needs to be someone, it needs to be a player in the locker room that can carry your mission out when you're not there. And it's usually going to be the person that you're going to have to work the hardest to get buy-in from so that they can become your advocate. So I'm going to tell you about my advocate in Miami. She was a amazing, amazing woman. Her name was Sherelle, and she was a 40-year-old, just absolute rock star. She had been in the role for, gosh, 10, 15 years at that point, like more years than I had been out of high school, right? And so when I got there, Sherelle had been through 4 leaders in 4 years on this team alone. And what I realized was she was a top performer. She was a little bit of a lone wolf because she kind of didn't want to be around the C players, which we're going to talk about that here in a second, towards the end of the video, is how you got to create a culture either catered to A players or C players. So we'll talk about that later in the video. But what I realized was getting Sherelle's buy-in was one of the hardest things I had to do. And I could have gotten buy-in from other teammates, other people on my team, but it wouldn't carry the weight, right? The easy people to get buy-in are the people that are going to be not really respected for buying into your vision. And so she was a top salesperson, but she just knew what she wanted and she went after it. So as a young leader, I had to understand she's not being hard to get along with. She just needs to know that I'm not going anywhere. I care enough about her and the rest of the team to do what's needed to help her and the rest of the team see success. I'm not here for the short term. I'm here for the long term. And I'm willing to sacrifice and serve to make sure that they hit their goals. And so the easy thing to do is go after low hanging fruit. My challenge to you is find the advocate that's hard to get on your team, but if they were on your team, would carry the most weight in the locker room when you weren't there. So got to create an advocate when you're getting buy-in. So the fifth thing that Miami taught me was you got to tell your people the truth. You cannot sugarcoat this. This happens so much in leadership where we just want to be liked. We just want to be loved by the new team. We don't want to rift. We're walking in and we want to be the liked leader. And so many times we forget we are leading adults. Tell your people the truth early and often in love, but it's going to go so much further than you think. It's key to ensuring they know where they are, that they know where the team is, they know where you stand as the leader, and they know where the turnaround is. Like, where are we in this status, right? And so clarity is kindness when it comes to turn around a team. To try to sugarcoat it and then spring on them that they're on an action plan or they're getting terminated or their jobs are changing is not going to help anybody. Clarity is kindness. Keep your people clear on where they are, the team is, and the turnaround is. All right, the last main thing I learned from Miami is to have sustained success, you need to keep track of what worked and what didn't and find out why. So the story behind this is painful to tell, but it will be hopefully profitable to hear. Is when I led in Miami, my first year there, we were very fortunate. My team just decided to kick butt and take names, and we became the number one team in the country after I was the fourth leader in 4 years in that market. So walking in with no stability, no consistency, no performance, no excellence, just we were a hodgepodge team. And when we walked in, it had very little to do with me. I'm not taking any of the credit. It's all the credit of my teams. We became the number one team in the country. And I remember my DVP coming into my office, which was my boss's boss at the time. And he came into my office and congratulated me. And I said, thanks. And he said, so how'd you do it? Uh, um, like we sold a lot. Uh, that's what I had. We worked hard and we sold a lot and I didn't have an answer. And his words ring true to me today. And this is why this is the last and potentially one of the most impactful lessons I learned from this first leadership experiences. He said, the worst thing in the world for a leader is to fail and not know why. The second worst thing in the world for a leader is to win and not know why. And the reason that is because if you don't know why, you can't take the parts that worked and duplicate it, and you can't take the parts that didn't work and eliminate it. And boy, was that true, because the next year, years 2, 3, and 4 that I was there, we didn't compete for the number one team in the country. And I was forever for the next 2.5 years trying to figure out how to recreate year one. But the tough part was because I didn't log, write down, keep track of what we actually did to be able to duplicate it, we were recreating ourselves unnecessarily. So the last lesson I learned from Miami is when you figure out what's working, keep track of it so you can duplicate it. When you figure out what's not working, discard it as long as you know why so that you can duplicate the good, eliminate the bad. So fast forward, that was my first leadership turnaround was Miami, 27 to 31 years old, and it was a journey. And so then we transitioned to Jacksonville, Florida, where I moved my wife and my daughter to Jacksonville, new business unit, new team, same story though, right? I get to Jacksonville. I was supposed to have a staffing plan of 6 people reporting to me. And I ended up getting there and they said, hey, you have 2 people reporting to you and a trainee. And the trainee lives in Pensacola, which was 8 hours away by drive, right? So I'm like, holy crap, like okay. So I'm walking into new city again, new environment again, new culture again. And not only is the team a rebuild, I don't even have the people to do the work, right? So I got to roll up my sleeves and figure this out. And listen, in Jacksonville, we were very blessed. And that first year, we turned that team around. That year, we were the number 2 team in the country. And that was the COVID year. And we turned that market around. The Jacksonville market, we turned around the year before we got there. That market did $1.2 million. we were in that market leading that team for 3 years. We went from 1.2 million in sales to 3.8 million in sales in 3 short years and set records the last year we were there. And we're going to talk about the journey and what the lessons that role taught me. So the first one was the right people in the foundation speed the turnaround up. So I had the two people that I had, I was very fortunate. The two people that I had were top, right? They were elite. They were top performers. They had been there for a while. They had experience. They know the market. They know the skills needed, and they were applying them. So that having the people in place that are foundational, whether it be one person, or two people, or 200 people, having the right foundational people in the markets on the teams allows for the turnaround to speed up. And their skills and experience in Jacksonville allowed for me to properly be able to spend time filling the missing 4 salesperson pieces, and allowed me to properly manage the gaps that we had, and attack those while the 2 foundational pieces were doing their job well. So find the right foundational pieces, whether they're already in place or if they're not in place, quickly find them so that you can go on to the other pieces of the rebuild. So the second thing is, hey, you got to paint a vision. And what I learned in Jacksonville was we need to, as the leader, state the advantage of this team turning around for the people that are already there. And here's why. So while it may seem obvious on the surface that, of course, the team needs to turn around and we need to get the team going back in a better direction, it also poses a threat to the ego of the 1 or 2 people that have been holding the team up all these years. What I found is people have an ego, even if the team is not winning, where if the spotlight is shine on them, so we have some people that like to be a big fish in a small pond. They just like it. And even though the mission is to grow the size of the pond and grow the size of the fish in the pond, there are people that would prefer to be the biggest fish in a fish tank rather than getting into a pond where there is more abundance. And so you have to state to those people the advantage of the turnaround. So what that can look like is, hey, listen, not all the pressure is going to be on you. You're going to have people that are not bugging you with questions nonstop. You're going to have people that are going to be consistent in the group that we can count on. So all these things will be good for the staple of the group. It helps alleviate some potential for the culture killer. So we had one of these people on our team in Jacksonville, and I had to stipulate to him, hey, we'll call his name Bill for the example. I said, hey, Bill, listen, I want you to be a key player here because you always have been, but I'm going to count on you to keep the positivity up, right? The new people don't know what the market did before, and you've been here for 8 years. They don't need to know that the market struggles to keep people. They don't need to know that the market struggles to hit performance metrics. They don't need to know the difficulty between the distance of some of the prospects meetings that we're going to. They don't need to know any of those challenges. We need to keep the positivity up and the downside away from them as long as possible so that they can create a narrative in their head about what this opportunity could be. Therefore, their success rises, rising tide raises all ships. And now all of a sudden everyone's winning. So helping them know and realize what this turnaround could do for them individually, really, really important. The third thing I learned in the Jacksonville, North Florida gig was you got to know the strengths of your people. So let me just define strengths really quick. Strengths are not what people do well. That's half the equation. Strengths are what people do well and what gives them energy when they do it. I'll let that marinate for a second. Strengths are what people do well and what gives them energy when they do it. So here's a easy one that happens all the time. And I've made this mistake, so please don't take this personally. Just because people do a task well doesn't mean they love to teach people to do that task, right? Just because I'm a leader in sales, so I use this example. Just because somebody's really good at sales doesn't mean they want to teach everybody how to be good at sales. That's the leader's job, right? Now, it doesn't mean you can't employ their assistants to delegate some of the tasks, but if they are really good, if their strength is selling and maybe they're a lone wolf and they don't want to have nothing to do with anybody else, you have to know that. Because if every time they're turning around, you're asking them to get in front of the team to teach them something, you're asking them to mentor a new hire, you're asking them to teach people a skill with a new tool that they've mastered that everybody else hasn't yet, that top performer is going to be drained. Like they could be good at the skill, but they don't they don't want to teach their people. Like a really good example, right, is athletes. There's not a lot of top athletes that are really good coaches. You know why? They don't have patience, right? They know their work ethic. They know their skill level. They know their attention to detail. They know their standards. And if the people they're teaching are not living up to it, they can become more frustrated than they can fruitful. So please know, you have to know your people's strengths. Sometimes the people that you can tap on the shoulder to teach your team something is not the same person that actually does the thing well. Sometimes the people to mentor your new hires is not the same person that has been there the longest. It may drain them even though they're actually good at it. You got to find out what the strengths are. And the strengths are what they do well and what gives them energy when they do it. The fourth thing I learned in Jacksonville is a massive lesson to a lot of people in the leadership space today because it's about remote teams. And what I learned was remote teams, remote team members can be equally valuable to culture only if you're helping them and being intentional about doing it. So I had a person that sat in the Panhandle when I sat in Jacksonville. Now the Panhandle, again, it's about 8.5 hour drive. And this person came back to ADP and this person came back to the organization and it was a second stint. And he came back and he was a pretty typical contributor. You know, he would sell around $200,000-$300,000 a year, which is about typical for the product we were selling. And what I remember hearing from him that he had gotten told numerous times that this territory that it was in was just a honey hole. Like he should be crushing it out there, but he was always a $350,000 guy, not $1 million producer. So what I started to do was I needed to develop trust with him, which would be different than everybody else. So I talked to him probably more than anybody else on the team. And here's how I did it. So every single week, I spent about 2 hours on the phone with him talking about everything under the sun. And I'm talking about work. I'm talking about his daughters. I'm talking about his wife. I'm talking about his motorcycle club. I'm talking about when he was going to New Orleans for Mardi Gras, his Mardi Gras crew. I'm talking about his house buying adventure. Like I spent 2 hours uninterrupted on the phone with this man every single week. And what it started to do was it broke down the trust barriers because he was also a military veteran. So what we figured out was, what did he actually want from this job? Like, what did he really like? What role did this job play in his life? And we started to break that down. And man, his love for his daughters, ironically, his love for his daughters and his love for his motorcycle club were pretty one and the same. And what he wanted to do is he wanted to drive his motorcycle across the country. And I was like, dude, let's do it. He's like, yeah, I don't have time, I don't have money, whatever. I was like, so you need time and money to do that? He said, yeah. I said, all right. So we broke down how much time and how much money do you need? And what we did was the third year I was in there, and he had been there for about a year and a half at that point. I said, here's the deal. If we sell this by January, so January was halfway through our fiscal. If we sell this halfway through our fiscal year, I'm going to let you take all of February off. And because I knew his comp plan, if he sold that, he was going to make way more money than he needed to drive across country. So we set out in May to have him hit that number by next January. So every time we talked, his energy was up. He had passionate about it. Remember, remote workers have to want to do it when you're not there. And what we did was create a want in him that allowed him to take a trip across country, took 3 weeks off in February, took 2 of the 3 weeks to drive across the country in his motorcycle, and then another week and a half to fly north to see his daughters that had just went to college. And he came back in February more refreshed than ever and sold an additional $500,000 in the back 4 months of our year, all because I spent the time to take an interest in what he wanted from the job and took an interest in him with 2 hours. I'm telling you, uninterrupted time is probably the ultimate reflection of caring for someone especially in a remote environment. Take the time because remote workers are here to stay, and our ability to get them to perform when we're not watching could be a game changer as we continue to progress and turning around teams. So, okay, last thing from Jacksonville is losing your top performer can be an opportunity to raise everyone else's contribution if you deal with it properly. So I had a a salesperson that in previous stories he was the guy that had been there 8 or 9 years when I got there, and um, was having a tough year, my second year, and decided 2 months into the year he was going to take another opportunity. So 2 months into the year, he left, and he was such a staple. It shook the region, and not only did it shake the region, he was carrying 54% of the expected quota that my team carried that year. So our team quota was 2.5 million. He carried 1.2 of it. No, I'm sorry, 1.3 of it. So 1.3 million out of the 2.5 million he carried, and he just left. And I remember calling my mentor at the time, and I was just like, Mike, I don't know what to do. And he walked me through step by step what this could look like. And he helped me with the communication to my team. And so what it did was it allowed me to take a step back and say, okay, I addressed the team head on. Say, guys, we lost Bill. Um, took another opportunity. Here's what this does for you. Look at all the opportunity Bill had as the top sales rep here. All of it's going to be dispersed out based on performance going forward. So all of you have more opportunity to make more money than you ever had in your life starting today. Now, what we do with it is completely up to us. The next 2 weeks, I'm going to be spending time with all of you guys to figure out, now that you have more opportunity, how high can your performance go? And what can this job do in terms of your lifestyle if we maximize what we've gotten? And I got to tell you, that turnaround, that year, we sold $3.8 million. That was my last year in Jacksonville. Set records. We had $2 million producers that year instead of one, because that $1 million producer left us. So we doubled our rate of top producers. We doubled our annual sales projection per sales associate. All of these people made more money in the market than they'd ever made. And all of these things all of a sudden got the attention of people up in the organization. And it led to my first VP role ever. And so I share that with you because sometimes when we lose top performers, it can be terrifying. And I got to tell you, losing top performers, especially if it's done strategically, this particular instance, it wasn't done strategically. But if you have a top performer that's a culture killer, the best thing you can do is get him out of the organization, because it opens up opportunity for everybody else, and the culture goes through the roof. So now we're in Houston. So a lot of lessons from Miami, a lot of lessons from Jacksonville. Now I'm taking my first role as a leader of leaders. And I'm only going to share one thing I learned from Houston, because I think it encapsulates this message and this training more than any other lesson that I've learned thus far in my leadership journey. And the lesson is this: you can either have a culture suited for A players to thrive or C players to survive, but you can't have both. You got to pick. As the leader, you have to pick what culture you are going to create. And more importantly, you're going to have to pick and manage that choice every single day. You're going to have to make decisions through that lens. You're going to have to make staffing decisions through that lens. You're going to have to make policy decisions through that lens. You're going to have to make pay decisions through that lens. You're going to have to make ethics decisions through that lens. You're going to have to make decisions in terms of who does what, when, where, how. You're going to have to make decisions that are hard. You're going to have to make communication decisions. All of these things are going to have an impact on your people and are going to tell them what you've chosen. Have you chosen to create an environment where A players can thrive or C players can survive? It's your choice, but you can't just tell them this is your choice. Your actions are going to tell them every single day what culture you're creating. And a lot of things stem from what that culture will be. So I hope this teaching bless you. Until next time, keep leading from the front so you don't get left behind.